The opening scene of the television series Superman and Lois is stunning. Here, Clark tells us how his most vivid memories are from those days that have marked his life. He recalls first experiencing the Earth's yellow sun and the love of Martha and Jonathan Kent. His first days in Metropolis as Superman, and above all, the day he met the woman who would change his life, Lois Lane. Up to this point, it's a classic Superman story, one that is familiar to us, but then the story took an unexpected turn. And in the first 10 minutes of the series, Superman falls in love with Lois, shares his secret with her, they get married, and then they have a pair of twins whom they name Jonathan and Jordan. This already tells us about a completely different approach, because here Superman was allowed to grow up, a luxury that superheroes often don't have, since many seem to live in an eternal present where their lives only present an illusion of change. In contrast, this is a man of steel who knows how to be Superman, but is still learning to be a father. A concept that really humanizes the character, because beyond the powers and adventures, we can identify with this struggle and his desire to emotionally connect with his children, while at the same time dealing with the responsibilities of being a Superman. And if you're a father or mother, haven't you ever felt that way? I think this series gave us the most human Superman in the character's history, a reminder that our everyday struggles are battles just as important as any other. But his children aren't the only thing that humanizes Superman, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Luckily, I'm not alone. To give you my opinion and discuss this series in depth, I spoke with my good friend Armando Machuca from the Peruvian channel, Fanboy, another big Superman fan with whom I always talk about our favorite superhero. Today's video is a hybrid of a video essay and review, which I rarely do. Let me know if you like the format at the end. I'm Gio, the Geek Monitor. Today we're debuting a new recording set and we're going to take Superman Lois very, very seriously. The plot of the first season of Superman Lois begins at a point where Clark's life is about to take a turn. Initially, he feels distant from his children, especially Jordan, who was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder a year prior. It wasn't that Clark didn't want to be there, but his job as a reporter and as Superman kept him from being as present as he would have liked. Soon after, he's fired from the Daily Planet and learns that his mother, Martha Kent, has died. We can all relate to those moments when everything seems to go wrong. But Clark, as is, seizes the opportunity. He had been very happy growing up in Smallville, close to his parents and surrounded by a community that felt like an extended family to him. He and Lois decide to move to Smallville and live at the Kent farm, where he plans to reconnect with his children. Metropolis and the rest of the world may need Superman, but Clark felt that he and his family needed Smallville. This is the core premise of the series occurring in the opening minutes. Despite the appealing and intriguing aspects of this project, many people, including myself, harbored doubts about it. This is because several of these characters initially belonged to the Arrowverse, the interconnected universe of CW series that began with Arrow in 2012. The truth is, I was a huge Arrowverse fan. I once watched every episode of every series, despite how much I seem to dislike it now. However, it must be admitted that not all seasons of the series were good. In many cases, the quality declined, becoming more apparent after the Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Look, I have to say that I'm one of those who appreciate the Arrowverse, but if it ended, I think it was a nice closure. I think the crises were pretty good for a television budget, but after that, the endings of each series were terrible, each one worse than the last. So it gave me this feeling of, why do only these series work 3 seasons, and in the 4th it starts to go downhill, and then after that, when Superman and Lois began, I felt discouraged as it seemed like a mess.
It should be clarified that Superman Lois was not a series that took place in the Arrowverse. The series is set in a self-contained world with no other superheroes beyond those featured in the show. But since many of these characters started in the Arrowverse, that's why we connected them, at least in essence. But after a few episodes, you realize it was completely different from the Arrowverse, which was beneficial.
The Roberto quote. It was a kind of style, a kind of audiovisual tone, from the color to the pacing of the episode. The main thing on the other side was the theme. This was something else. In some cases, the heroic family core living in this universe worked really well. This perspective offered an interesting twist, being more from the inside out rather than the outside in like the other one.
The Marvel Cinematic Universe could learn a lot from Superman, Lois, The Reverso began with the Arrow series and expanded to include numerous superheroes and plotlines, which was initially remarkable. However, the expanding plot and characters eventually became overwhelming for some viewers. After the seemingly unbeatable climax of the Crisis on Infinite Earths, many of us were left with the feeling that there was nothing beyond this and stopped watching the series. Also, because the quality was already declining, this is where Superman Lois comes in. Instead of cramming more superheroes into a single story, they told a more intimate, standalone tale with unique characters and plot to stand out. And something I really liked was that they introduced several interesting changes to Superman's lore. The biggest one, without a doubt, was the twins Jordan and Jonathan. We had previously seen Superman as a family man, a role I personally viewed favorably, though I acknowledge my bias. I feel like it really suits the character, but seeing him with twins is definitely something new. Similarly, giving them distinct personalities enhanced the plot as each character had their own specific issues. Although at first I was a little afraid of this dynamic with the twins look, what I was afraid of was that the dynamic between the brothers would be like this. Do you remember the comic Superman Batman Generations? Of course I love it, it's one of my favorites. In this comic, Superman has a son named Jonathan and a daughter named Kara. However, Jonathan was exposed to kryptonite worship by Lex Luthor while still in his mother's womb. So he never developed his powers like Kara did, which made Jonathan grow up full of resentment toward his family and eventually become a villain capable of killing his own brother. It's a great comic. I have a full narration of it. I'll leave it for you somewhere around here, but at least I wasn't interested in seeing this dynamic of the good son versus the bad son. Exactly what I didn't want was for them to replicate this dynamic of Superman's son turning bad and the other son getting the powers. If he's the good one, then it's the bad one against him. And they would have this rivalry, brothers. But then I saw that, there was rivalry, but not a bad one. You can tell that they really care about each other.
The relationship, as it's written, the relationship is really good, right? I was also fascinated by the fact that, making one of the sons anxious, and that was also something that really got me hooked again in general. I've dealt with anxiety issues my whole life, so suddenly me too. Bam. I got hooked through that. And I also like that they were good siblings.
And this is where we start to see Superman's humanity much more clearly. Since he's an experienced man of steel, who seems to have a clear understanding of his responsibilities but also his limits. He's a hero who cares about the whole world, even though this causes problems with his father-in-law General Lane, who once tried to officially recruit him as part of the United States military. Despite this, he has many doubts about his family. It's interesting to see that Superman is like this character who always knows what's right when it comes to the world. When it comes to politics and how much to get involved in the politics of other countries and everything. This Superman had his code well established, so he knew when to help the United States, he knew when to tell his father-in-law, you know what? No? I'm uncomfortable with this. It's not right, though I liked it. But when it was about his family, he had a lot of doubts, and I liked that because it makes the character very human. It's like, yes, I'm very good at my job, but when it comes to my family and my son, well, I don't know what to do.
And I think that's what was nice, that he didn't know you, but he's going to talk to his son, and the son says, you have to be better at this than me. He was wrapped up in his own world, just like any teenager in their own universe. How do you enter a teenager's universe? It's really hard if there hasn't been any work put in there. A work of connection, of empathy. If you don't share things in common, how do you get in there?
And then, I swear, even if you've worked on it and even if you have things in common, anyway, they're at an age where they want their own space and want to explore. Also their own individuality. So I thought it was nice to realize that not even Superman can fully get into the mind of a teenager. When you're a parent, there's a point where you have to come to terms with the fact that you don't really know what you're doing. So personally, I also really connected with this side of Clark. The series also depicted Superman's humanity through visual elements such as the increasing gray hair in his hair and beard with each passing season. This deviates from the classic approach but effectively represents the passage of time for this character's version. Another one of my favorite points of the series is definitely Lois Lane, but Lois Lane has a very important role. She's not like the damsel in distress, instead she's a very important character. In fact, even Lex Luthor seems to be more of an antagonist to Lois Lane than to Superman in this series.
In this series, Superman doesn't exist without Lois, and I think you've identified the key point. that duo is a pillar. It's a pillar of the story, of the adventures, and of the character, and of many of the best adventures as well, right? I love this Lois. I thought she was really well written and well acted. The casting, this young woman was perfect.
Yeah, I also feel like, I probably think she's my favorite Lois of all. The story of the performances, along with my adventures with Superman, I really like that one too.
But for me, I love Tony, my adventures with Superman, right? I love that it's so fresh and so young.
This Lois was far more than a distressed damsel. She was a driving force in the story who truly helped Superman overcome the problems that the villains threw at him. Honestly, I believe it was time for another Lois Lane to have such significance.
I mean, we come after a bunch of Loises, just a little bit bland, right? Without any flavor.
You know, during vacation, I just watched Superman, the animated series again, and I really like Lois Lane's comments, but I think her comments are really on point, but Lois Lane from Superman, the animated series, I feel like they always downplay her a little, like she doesn't shine as much. In fact, I think even Emil Hamilton stands out more than she does. Also, for example, I love Amy Adams as an actress. The community knows that I really like Man of Steel, but one of the things I just don't like about Man of Steel is Amy Adams as Lois Lane. I always felt that she was missing like a bit of fire, a bit of personality, passion. I don't know what it is, but
also, that story wasn't written around the duo or the relationship. It was about Superman's self-discovery. So you needed her to keep falling out of a spaceship every time so he could save her?
Here it's the complete opposite. In fact, as I mentioned, the ex-Luthor in this series feels more like an antagonist to Lois Lane than to Superman himself. It's as if Superman and his sons are more like an obstacle that stands between him and the person he truly hates, the one who put him in jail. In this sense, the series featured some great villains, like Lex, who, even though he was a less refined and less scientific version than his comic book counterparts, still felt like a real threat. This was because he was extremely cunning, manipulative, and calculating. On multiple occasions, he destabilizes Superman's family, causing them to question their own values. Doomsday, the physical threat of the last season, closely resembles his comic book counterpart visually, but I'm uncertain. At this point, I felt Tal-Rho, Superman's half-brother, was very easily manipulated and fickle with his motivations. On the other hand, I thought he was a great addition to the series because besides presenting a physical threat, he shows us what would have happened to Superman if his upbringing had been less loving. Moreover, his looks underscore the idea of family as the show's main theme. Bruno Mannheim also seemed like a great antagonist to me during the third season. But Ali Alston and this whole subplot of the bizarre world, I feel like those are parts that didn't quite come together. So well, it's time to talk about what we didn't like so much.
Actually, my least favorite season was the one with the bizarre world. I think that I also think it was because the script was a bit weak, but also because of a television production issue. If you're going to make it bizarre, I expect a square world, right? No, I leave everyone already bizarre. Everyone is already bizarre, not just one. Same thing, but with the color shifted to red.
Personally, what made me a bit desperate about this series was that, like every CW series, it was screaming for something. The plot almost inevitably had to involve a teenage and social drama. This was particularly evident in Jonathan and Jordan's situations, as their relationships never truly succeeded. For me, I never cared about the surrounding characters. I felt they were more of a nuisance than something that enhanced the story. And there were times when this was really frustrating because suddenly you had scenes where Lois Lane and Lex Luthor were engaged in a big live debate about who was right about Superman. But we have to interrupt this scene because Jonathan broke up with his girlfriend. Does he want to get her back? I swear I don't even remember the girlfriend's name, but there's an even worse one. We're in the last season. Clark receives his father-in-law's heart to come back to life and returns to his family dressed as if going to the office in a short, less emotional scene. Meanwhile, the rest of the episode was dedicated to the wedding of Clark's ex's ex, and that honestly is very, very Warner Channel. Aside from that, the show had some incredible moments. I enjoyed how Clark decided to reveal his secret to the world, motivated by the fact that several people in Smallville already knew and still chose to protect him. The Smallville community recognizes Clark and his family as essential members of the community and shows them their support. Even when Lex Luthor tries to buy their land, offering them large sums of money, this approach moves a bit away from the classic version of Superman where his secret identity is always kept intact. But it captures the essence of other moments where people end up protecting Superman in times of vulnerability because they deeply trust him. Superman never takes the world's trust for granted, as he knows his immense power requires him to continually prove his trustworthiness. Every day, I enjoyed this because it portrays a Superman who is highly cognizant of the social and political symbol he embodies. All these elements eventually make much more sense in the final season. By the way, I left an infographic on my Instagram with comic recommendations to start reading Superman. To watch my full conversation with Armando and other interviews, check out the members section. Let's continue. In the previous season, Doomsday beats Superman and destroys his heart. Samuel Lane injects himself with a special substance, dies, and donates his heart to Clark, allowing him to come back to life. However, a human heart differs from a Kryptonian one. After a heart transplant, Superman returns weaker and learns his powers and strength will slowly diminish over time. Initially, it shocks him, but he eventually accepts that he will age like everyone else. He begins pondering his legacy and tackling the world's most intricate issues. Inspiring people to be supportive and lead by example, eventually his children marry and have their own kids. And we see Clark happy to be able to live a life together with Lois Lane, the woman who would fill his days with hope. They spent the rest of their lives together until Lois's cancer returned and Clark had to live a few more years without her. But with a new pet named Crypto, his heart eventually stops too. However, his story continues. When Superman opened his eyes, he found himself reunited with his family, friends, and a former rival whom he forgave. The Man of Steel in life had managed to change the course of immense rivers, but in these moments he reflected on how fortunate he was to have experienced that humanity he always defended. In the end, Lois Lane waits for him so they can fly together again, wearing that red dress she thought she would never wear again. After the cancer, accompanying each other on a new adventure. Superman's life story beautifully intertwines his beginning and end, where the phrase that Martha Kent had framed on the farm resonates, one that we'll probably all say at some point in our lives. It flew by. Superman's stories seldom end, but this one felt perfect as it captures the character so well.
I think Superman is hope even in death because it's consistent with the character, and besides, it's what I expect from the character. Not even in death is the hope lost that something good will surround and embrace us.
And yes, it's a science fiction story, one of the most powerful characters ever created, but at its core, there's a human story that connects with us. Truthfully, I've always feared time passing by, because it means that children grow up, that the people around you leave, and that you are also closer to leaving. However, such stories reveal another perspective. There's beauty in the notion of aging together with your chosen partner. And it's curious to see how Superman, this character who is capable of lifting infinity, he comes to the conclusion that his greatest happiness and joy was always with the people he loved and who loved him. And the interesting thing is that we all have a chance to achieve this.
The moment you realize that you can go all the way around the universe, and that your real peace and tranquility is with your parents, with your children, with your wife, with the people you love, you reflect and wonder why you didn't invest more from the start.
I'm not someone who usually asks for photos, but at the end of 2024, I wanted to ask my family for one. To remember this beautiful and brief moment in time when we managed to be together, and for which I truly give thanks every day. The series made me feel that we enter this world alone, but if we're lucky, we'll have gained much more by the time we depart. So much so that in the end, maybe we can also say, did it go by so fast?